Before we jump into it today, I wanted to extend a quick invitation. If you've not yet joined us inside the podcast newsroom, you're going to want to. That is the place to get the answers to your most pressing podcast questions. Simply head over to thepodcastnewsroom.com, sign up for your private feed, and you will receive a link to submit your question to be answered in a future episode. Can't wait to see you. Again, thepodcastnewsroom.com. If there's one thing every podcaster learns, life will life. Between running a business and working with clients and honestly just existing in the world, podcasting can feel like just another thing that gets done. But over the 12 plus years that I've been doing it, I have built systems that make it not just manageable, but sustainable. That's what I'm going to share with you today. Welcome to the More Profitable Podcast with Stacey Harris. I'm Stacey, and this is the spot to learn more about the strategies, tactics, and tools you need to build your more profitable podcast. My team and I work every day with podcasters like you to shift shows from frustrating time sucks to productive members of your sales team, because your show should be built to generate and convert leads. So let's get into it. This is going to be a big one because it's a universal truth. One day when you must get an episode out, you must get something recorded to send it over to your editor, whatever it may be, but you are at the deadline. There is no more room to move it. Something will happen. If you're anything like our clients have been on the production side of things as we started this year, you will come back from holiday break sick. You will get knocked out by the reality of the world we're living in. You will get overwhelmed by weather-related interference via your children and or your internet access. We've had it all as we've started this year. And over the last 12 years, I've had it all too. It's shown up in, the neighbors deciding that that was the day they were going to rebuild something in their yard, or my landscaper showed up on a day that was not landscaping day, but it was in fact like deep landscaping time, and they were like trimming all of my trees, and it was like not just a 45-minute hour visit to mow the lawn and clean up the flowers. No. It was like, it's gonna be Santa Ana winds, and we've got to trim all the trees back, and I'm gonna be here all day. It will get in the way. And so I have built systems that allow me to deal with this, manage this, and also just keep my show sustainable and supportive of me and my business's goals without it being this weight around my neck and this piece that has to be delivered to all the time. And I think when we talk about a weekly show, that comes up a lot. Like it's just one more freaking thing I've got to do. And I don't have room for that. And if you have felt that way, you're not alone. We all feel that way. And I think the older I get, the more I feel that way. And so it is imperative that we build in things that allow us to be supported by this thing in our business, right? It's supposed to be helping. This is my leveraged sales tool. This is the thing going out and being visible and raising its hand to questions when I'm not around, i.e. 2 a.m. when you Google something. This is the thing that can have a conversation with someone when all I have time to do is say, I can absolutely solve your problem. Here's some information. This is that asset. This is this leverage tool. I want it to work for me. But doing that does involve building some things into your business. Before I get into those things, I want to be really freaking clear. Like the shiniest, cleanest, clearest glass you've ever seen, clear. Not all of this, in fact, none of this existed day one of my podcast. These are things that I have built over time, mostly through trial and error, and definitely in response to having screwed things up. I have been very reactive in building these systems. What I want to encourage you to do is to be proactive in building these systems. And that can mean getting support in building them, building systems out like this. And these kinds of conversations are the conversations we have in podcast strategy intensives all the time. And to a larger extent, these are literally the systems we build into people's businesses when we handle their production. You know, you're gonna you're gonna notice that a lot of what I talk about is literally our production process, because that's why I built it this way, so that we could quickly flip a switch for our clients and remove some of the pressure. We've got a client who just signed with us right at the end of the year and has been onboarding with us at this beginning of the year. And when I heard how much they were still managing of the day-to-day of their show when working with their previous partner, I knew we were going to be able to deliver a really exceptional experience really early. And we've already gotten that feedback of, this is night and day. I'm saving time, because guess what? There's a whole slew of things that they're no longer having to figure out, that they're no longer having to do, because we have built that for them already and placed them into these systems. So there are solutions. If you're listening and you're resonating and you're like, yes, this is what I need to do, then we need to have a conversation, because you do not have to do this alone. You do not have to figure this out. All of the things we're going to talk about today already exist and are available to you. You just have to decide that you're ready for them. All right? I want to jump in with our first one, and that's maybe the biggest component, and it is really the purpose behind my building the podcast strategy intensive, is planning ahead. I spent way too many years white knuckling my podcast. It is the absolute antithesis of building a sustainable and manageable podcast. When you are doing things last minute, when you are sitting down to record and saying, cool, what do I want to talk about? Cool, what are the questions I've been getting from people all the time? What do they need to hear right now? This question gets asked of me so often. It's like, if I could just figure out what they needed to hear. You know what they need to hear, because you spend your whole life listening to them, because your full-time job is listening to your audience, listening to your clients. You know what they need. You're just never gonna, like, have the world's greatest ideas when you sit down to have ideas. They're the things that come to us in the shower, in the car, on a run, whatever the case may be. And so building something that allows you to put those someplace, and then building a time where you sit down and you put those ideas in a strategic order to support your goals, that's planning ahead. And so I absolutely, in our dashboards on, and we're going to talk more about these, but in our dashboards in Monday.com, I have an area of the board called episode ideas. So when I've got an idea, I just go into my app, my Monday app, and I go to the board that all of my podcast production stuff is managed in, and I go to the episode ideas and I drop it in there. It really is that simple. I just open the app, I hit the button, and I add it. And sometimes when I sit down to do my quarterly planning, those ideas make no sense and they get deleted. Sometimes I'm like, oh, this is fantastic, and I goes down a whole other road. And sometimes it's perfect and it's already laid out exactly what I needed, because I had a fully formed idea. I will be honest, that third one is the least common. But building out a planning process, building out a time in which I go and take these half-baked and occasionally mostly baked, I wish, ideas, and building them into a strategy, building them into a structure that allows me to be speaking to my offerings, is so imperative. Like I said, this is why we built out the podcast strategy intensive. Is if I could choose one part of our work that would have the shortest change and impact for a client, it's planning ahead, because there is no batching if you don't plan ahead. And if you're not batching, you are going to always feel like you've got to get this episode done. At the start of every quarter, I sit down and I map out my episodes so that I know this is what's happening. This is where this goes. This is what I'm saying, and this is why I'm saying it. And that way, when I sit down, generally about a week later, to batch those episodes, I can batch 3, 4, 5, sometimes 6 episodes in a day because I know exactly what I'm saying and I know exactly why I'm saying it. And all I've got to get done in that time period is get my voice into this digital file. I was going to say to tape, but then I realized it would make me sound like I was 1,000 years old. But I did learn to cut tape in school. Anyways, I want to be able to do each piece one thing at a time. And I've talked about this on the show before. I will try to find the episode and put it in the show notes. Honestly, I've talked about it in so many episodes, but I do believe we have an episode like fully around this idea. But if you can just do one thing at a time, plan, script, record, edit, show notes, blog post, whatever you're creating there, and then creating the marketing assets and then doing the actual promotion, it will change your life. It will change how you approach your show because each of those tasks will be done more effectively. They will have a bigger impact because you're allowing yourself the space to give your full focus to each element, to each step. Whereas when you're doing this last minute thing, it's about just getting it done. And so you're just running through those steps with a box checker mentality, right? I just need to get this done. And that's great. Done is better than perfect. I absolutely agree. And done is not always better than effective. Done is not always better than efficient. And if you want this to be effective and you want this whole podcast to have any level of efficiency in your business, you are going to have to get comfortable planning ahead. If you struggle to do that alone, I totally get it. Interestingly enough, I was working on a podcast for a client and they mentioned this book and I had not read it yet, so I went to go read it immediately, of course. And it's coming up for me as I record this because I'm like, "Oh my gosh, this makes total sense." Gretchen Rubin has a book called The Four Tendencies. I am an obliger, as are I think most people in the book as I read it. And it means I have a much easier time getting things done or meeting the expectations of someone else than for myself. So if I set myself a deadline, I am absolutely 10 out of 10, I know me, going to break my own deadline to meet your deadline for the thing you need, even if the thing I need is objectively more important. And so for me, one of the best ways to make sure that I'm approaching the things in my business that need to get done is to add accountability, to add support. So if you're struggling to do this alone, it might be something as simple as you struggle to prioritize your own deadlines, to meet your own goals. Absolutely check out the book, Four Tendencies. It's great. Short read, quick read, great book. 2, find accountability. Again, this is why the podcast strategy intensive exists because I know how hard it can be to do this on your own. I know how hard it can be to prioritize this time on your own. And a great way to stay accountable to it, have podcast strategy intensive time so that you know I'm going to sit down with Stacy and I'm going to build out this plan and then I can go and take action with that. And for a lot of clients who do these sort of routinely. So they have somebody who handles their week to week production, but they sit down with me 2, 3, 4 times a year to do a podcast strategy intensive. The 30 days of email support is often how they actually get that quarter or that season, depending on how they run their show, batch recorded because it gives them enough time to be able to reach out to me and ask questions or get my eyes on their outlines or even their scripts for their episodes because they have that 30 days of support with me. And again, they're now using me as a way to enforce a deadline on themselves. So if you're struggling to plan ahead, if you're struggling to get this done, phone a friend, get help. Don't do it alone because fixing this first plan ahead step will make it so much easier for you to batch out every other task and for you to show up at your best to deliver a high quality output with each following step: the recording, the editing, if you're doing that yourself, building out your show notes or your blog posts, repurposing, creating your marketing assets, actually marketing the episode. That's a big one. And it all stems from having taken this step and building this first system of planning ahead. Number two thing I want to talk about is something that I kind of teased in this, is building out templates and tools that work for you. So part of that is your actual tools, your recording software, your editing tools, but it's also like your project management platforms. Where is your show managed? Having templates for things like your show notes, your episode outlines, even your social media posts, your graphics. Don't be reinventing the wheel each and every episode. Build out a process that you continue to deliver from. The other thing I like about this is it allows you to sort of systematically and automatically create a real consistency, both in your podcast itself. You get a very similar structure here each and every episode. You've got a hook at the beginning. I sort of get you to buy in on the episode. You've got an early call to action. We get into the meat and potatoes. We drive into our last call to action, and I tell you sort of what to do next. And that's it. That's a template because that's how I structure the show to make getting the show done simpler. It really is. I mean, it really is that simple. It's not magic. It's not sort of, sorcery here. It's systems. It's routine. It's templates. And so building out these pieces allow you to get these done really, really quickly. Having templates for my show notes, for my social graphics, they allow me to reduce the amount of decisions I have to make, reduce the amount of questions I have to answer in getting something done, whether I'm doing it or someone on the team is doing it. Because we're working from the same template, it's easier to leverage that out. The biggest component of this for me is the project management piece. The thing that changed how we delivered podcast production services was 5 years ago, building out our dashboard templates in Monday.com. And this is not a Monday.com thing. This is a dashboard build out thing because I have built this structure in to other people's businesses at this point for their podcasts, for other systems. I've done it in Monday.com. I've done it in Asana. We've done it in ClickUp. I've done it in Trello. I have built this system out in a much a streamlined version, a stripped down version of it in Google Sheets. This is something that I have done with Podcast Strategy Intensive clients on our call. We've gone in and we've roughed them out a version of our dashboard that worked for them, that allowed them to get line of sight on what was, what is, and what will be of their show, where each of those things is, so that they had one spot that they could go and find out what was happening with an episode, what had happened with an episode. Inside of my dashboard, I've got episode ideas. I've got episodes that I'm working on. I've got episodes that are already scheduled to go out. I've got episodes that have been released, and I've got data in there of how they performed on the first day, on the 7th day, at the 14th day, at the 30th day, so that I can go in really quickly when I'm making decisions about future episodes to see what's worked and what hasn't worked before. I've got notes on past episodes, the ones that I've gotten a lot of feedback on, the ones where I got additional questions, the ones that I use as a resource all the time. I have those flagged in our system so I know to prioritize them if I'm repurposing something, if I need to re-release something, if we need to revisit something, if I want to share a link. I've got all of that in my dashboard and at my fingertips quickly and efficiently. And that has saved so much time, but more importantly, brain space and capacity. This is what I'm talking about when I talk about sustainability. This is what I talk about when I'm talking about building something that you can keep doing for 12 plus years. That's how we got to, this is episode 669 of this show. The only way that happens is me building these templates and tools, building these systems. That has to exist for long tail impact. That has to exist for you to literally keep staying up with it. For you to not fade into oblivion after 5 to 10 episodes, which is what 80 to 90% of most podcasters do. Most of the podcasts you're seeing scrolling around in Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever are long since forgotten podcasts that are 3, 5, 8 episodes. And then somebody realized it was hard. It was too hard. And it was too hard because there was no system. There was no routine. There was no habit. There was no structure supporting them for when things got less exciting and less convenient. Because you need one of those things. One of those things has to be happening for this to keep going. And it's not going to happen without systems and structure. And that's the last piece I want to talk about is when things get less exciting, when things get more complicated, when things get less fun to do, that's where my third system comes into play. And that's building in flexibility into my process. And that comes from building sales assets with absolutely every episode. So I have an entire library of episodes I can repurpose if I need to buy myself space. We have had clients in the last several months where we have been able to go into their library and buy them an entire month off. They were getting lifed hard. And guess what? Their numbers are standard January numbers. They're still seeing leads come in. They're still seeing downloads of their show. They're still seeing responses to their emails. But their show is what their show was the last time we released it. But we were able to pull from that library and re-release something that was still going to have an impact, that was still going to be effective, all while buying them space. And that really is a result of the first and second system we talked about. So doing 1 and 2 are going to buy you 3. That flexibility in your system. Being able to access and find and evaluate and prioritize and get those out quickly. That comes from having those systems and templates and tools in place. It comes from having the line of sight and being able to plan ahead and say, oh, wait, we're not going to be able to do this. What do we need to do? That flexibility is possible, but it's built off the systems we've already talked about. The other thing, you get to decide what this show looks like. You get to decide what your capacity is, and you get to change your mind. And so what flexibility in this process might look like for you is running in seasons so that and we've got a podcast strategy intensive client who I work with who does this, and I love it. They book a podcast strategy intensive with me. We plan their season, outline their episodes, get everything rolling. They record all of their episodes, and then they go through production and everything. And then they release all of the episodes. And all they're doing while they're releasing episodes is marketing episodes. When they have released all of that season, they book a podcast strategy intensive with me. We debrief the previous season. We plan the next season, and the cycle starts again. So they're never both recording and in production and marketing and in promotion at the same time. That's what works best for them. And it's great and it's effective. And we also built out a plan and a strategy for how they could be marketing the episodes of previous seasons during that off-season time. So they're always promoting a podcast. They're always getting leads via that podcast, even when they're off season. But they're never in both production and promotion at the same time. And so they get to give 100% to both of those things. And that's huge But that's because they decided to build some flexibility into their process. What this can also look like for somebody who wants to be year-round, be evergreen, not have a seasonal show. I'm like this. I don't like having a seasonal show. It is very hard for me to turn off and turn on again. It's just easier if we just leave it open. Just leave it turned on, sort of always I'm like a microwave. I need to always be ready to go. I mean, I guess you could unplug and plug a microwave, but mine's like built into above my stove, so it's hard to unplug that. Anyways, you know what I'm saying? I'm always available. I need to stay in that sort of like ready mode. And so for somebody like me, it could be having some break in case of emergency episodes. Full disclosure, what that looks like in my business is I have a plan and a documented process for pulling episodes from the private podcast and releasing them here on the public podcast if I ever have an emergency and we run out of episodes. Granted, being ahead helps here, but I know exactly where I'm going if it gets to be Monday, Tuesday, and we don't have Wednesday's episode ready. And I don't have the capacity to record and get all the production done. I know what that plan is. I have a plan for when I need to go, nope, it's not happening. That system of flexibility, that system that you build, that process you build that allows you to take space when you need it is going to be imperative to building a sustainable show. And this is something we do with our production clients. This is something I talk about with intensive clients. And it's something that I want you to really prioritize as you move through this year is building in these systems. And maybe that means for you building them in yourself, but more likely it means getting some support so you can step into systems already built by an expert. Hey, you know who might be an expert that could help you with this? The team and I here at Uncommonly More. I know that totally surprised you, but it's true. If you head on over to uncommonlymore.com right now, you can learn more both about podcast strategy intensives and podcast production services, depending on what's right for you. If you're somebody who wants help with this and to hand over production is the way to go. If you're somebody who already has a production partner and you want to stay with that editor, those show notes writers, the people on your team, great. The intensive is the spot for you. Either way, uncommonlymore.com. Reach out, book a call with me. We can have a conversation and we can start building these systems in for you so that we can make sure that you too have a truly sustainable and effective podcast in your business. All right? I'll see you right back here next week. Thanks so much for listening to the show. Remember that content consumption does not make changes. So commit to doing something from today's episode. Maybe it's taking action on what we talked about. Maybe it's reaching out to me and learning more about podcast strategy intensives or what podcast production looks like with our team. All of that is over at uncommonlymore.com. And if you haven't yet signed up for the podcast newsroom, I want to remind you that is a great next step. If you're not really sure what comes next, hang out over there. Get those exclusive private episodes. That's over at podcastnewsroom.com. And the last favor I will ask, because social proof is endlessly important for sure, is to leave a rating or review for the show. If you go to ratethispodcast.com/more, that's the easiest way to do it. But I would love to hear what you thought of the show, what you think of the show, and if the show has been helpful for you. I can't wait to chat with you. So this is just the start of the conversation. Reach out so we can keep it going. Talk soon.